The answer is no. I think for people who are contemplating which one to get, I get which one's available to you.
The choice of either brand, there is often talk about switching. If you got Pfizer for the original doses, get Moderna. Is there a significant benefit to that? Is there anything that might hurt you if you don't do it?
There's a lot of enthusiasm about that, not based upon during the earlier part of this year. But frankly, we haven't seen any that really suggests that if you had the Moderna for the first two and then you got Pfizer for the third or vice versa, it really didn't make much difference.
Which was my situation. I had Moderna for the third one, and I'm still here, so I guess it worked.
Well, I'm glad.
Thank you, Doctor. What about concerns over the twindemic of COVID on one side, flu on the other? Should you get both shots at the same time? Can you get both shots at the same time?
You sure can. This has been studied in humans, and people who got both shots at the same time got a very good immune response, just like you'd get it if you got one shot and then another. Both shots at the same time doesn't blunt your immune response, nor does it really enhance it, so it's neutral. In terms of side effects, there were a few more side effects in people who got them both at the same time, and that's not surprising because you're getting two different vaccines, one in each arm. That said, the side effects weren't substantially different. Two sore arms as opposed to one. Body aches were a little more in people who got them both at the same time. Will I go back and get the influenza if I'm getting the COVID today? Will I go back in 2 weeks or 3 weeks and get the influenza vaccine? If the answer is it's really a hassle, I probably won't do it and get them both at the same time. If the answer is, well, I don't mind, I have plenty of time to do it, and split them up if you're concerned that you might have more side effects.
Have we been seeing any kind of uptick in people who are getting their flu shots?
No. People are getting their flu shots, but they're just not getting them at a higher level than over the last decades, frankly. The flu shots, while not perfect, frankly, they don't probably work as well as the COVID vaccines, still give very good protection, particularly against hospitalization. So they're really worthwhile getting, and they may help decrease the transmission. They're very helpful for the individual, and they may be helpful for the community.
Doctor, you think that people underestimate the dangers of influenza?
It's really interesting. I think the answer to your question is yes, but what's interesting is why. This is a terrible disease. Anybody who's had it will tell you that they never want to get it again. But people don't recognize that influenza every year kills around 30 to 35,000 Americans. That's crashes every year. So a lot of people are dying every year from influenza, but because decade after decade, we have sort of become immune to it. We're sort of inured to it. We don't pay as much attention to it because it's just the background noise. In the 19th century, the great plague of the time was tuberculosis. Terrible disease. So many were dying of tuberculosis. Tragically, so many still are. But tuberculosis, people are just accepting that we live with 30 to 35,000 deaths on average here with influenza.
You are listening to Ask an Expert. Our guest today, Dr. John Swartzberg, Clinical Professor Emeritus of Infectious Diseases and Vaccinology at the UC Berkeley School of Public Health. If you've got a question for the doctor, just email us, askus@kcbsradio.com. And doctor, we are going to ask you to hang on for just 1 second. 928, Kim joining us from your local Honda dealer's traffic center.
All right, Melissa, looking at the Bay Bridge, the Chilton out-of-body collision cam is still seeing traffic backed up well east of the maze on all three approaches. It's probably the worst on 580 with the backup onto 24, and then 880 as you come down the area. The fast lane said to be blocked by a long-standing stall with an SUV that lost a tire, and it looks like CHP hasn't quite cleared that just yet. A little slow spot looking better now as to Sunnyvale out of Cupertino. So North 85, they just cleared the crash at Fremont Avenue. Still sluggish, though, the 280 split. Your next update, 9:38 on the traffic leader, KCBS.
Mostly sunny skies today, just some overcast at the beaches, maybe a little bit at the bay as well. Highs from the 60s to the 80s. Traffic and weather together on the 8s on KCBS. KCBS News Time 9:29. You are listening to Ask an Expert. Our guest today, Dr. John Swartzberg, Clinical Professor Emeritus at the UC Berkeley School of Public Health. Again, if you've got a question, just email us at askus@kcbsradio.com. We are going to dive
COVID vaccine affecting women's periods. How does the vaccine affect that and why?
Well, I can answer the first part of your question. How does it do that? But I can't answer the question why. We can only guess. So the answer is yes. There was just this last week a very large study that showed that there was a delay of about a day in terms of periods in women who got vaccinated during that month. Some women. And in some women, it may be more significant in terms of altering their. That said, there was no evidence in this study nor in any other study that it influenced fertility at all. The big question, I think, is that what causes that? And the going hypothesis is that, like any infection, when we get immunized, our body has an immune response, and that immune response affects the entire body. Affects the entire body in terms of giving us protection against, for example, COVID. But with that response, it may alter slightly the whole period. Some women have gotten a delay for maybe 2 or 3 periods, but it's never permanent.
We talked earlier about the flu vaccine and the COVID vaccine, getting them at the same time. This listener wants to know what the optimal time might be for each shot.
Sure. Well, the optimal time for the influenza vaccine is really right about now to the end of October. A very good time to get it. Typically, we see influenza come to our region in December, particularly later December, but it really hits its stride in January and February, then starts to taper off. And typically, because we could be surprised and we could see cases of influenza earlier this year. Texas, particularly southern Texas right now, is seeing more influenza than typically they would see. So you clearly want to be protected from influenza before it gets to the community. So that's why now, to the end of the month, a lot of underlying problems that would predispose you to a bad outcome with influenza, I'd encourage you to get it earlier than later.
This listener says they've heard reports about a new variant in Europe, and how is that affected by the new bivalent vaccines?
Well, we've got. The answer is we don't know how well the new bivalent vaccine will work. It has a particular mutation that we're concerned about. There's several of these new variants that have that. Fortunately, they're not taking off here, but they are slowly growing here by about 1% a week, sometimes a little more than 1% a week, sometimes a little less. So they are growing. That is, they're out competing the dominant variant, which is BA.5. So we're going to have to wait and see what this. This reminds me of. Last year, Delta right about now was on its decline and really reached low levels in October. And then on December 1st, we had our first isolate of Omicron. And we all know what happened within 3 weeks with Omicron. It just exploded. So even if we don't see something right now, we have to be prepared for that.
All right, this listener wants to know if they're boosters, if those side effects are any different than the shots that people have already gotten.
To date, we're with the new booster compared to the previous boosters and the previous primary immunizations that we've gotten. So at least to date, we're not seeing anything different. And that's not surprising, frankly. We don't anticipate seeing anything different. Every year we make substantial changes, sometimes subtle changes to the